Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. We're in week 48 and it's quite a quick and unusual video this week because I'm just going to give you ideas and it's entirely up to you what you do with them. I will put a playlist at the top of the screen if you're new here for all of the videos in this series. We've made a quilt through 2023 on a garden theme and we're just in the last stages now of putting our quilt together and finishing it off. So today I'm going to show you some ideas for covering up any inaccuracies in your quilt piecing, any dodgy corners that you might have. I'm going to give you some ideas of how you can cover those over and add some finishing touches to your quilt top that are going to make it entirely your own. So let me take you around what I've got on my table. I've got my circle template that's going to come in handy, and I've got a bunch of offcuts that have been left over from the making of the quilt. I've got some heat and seal or bond web. I've got my embroidery scissors and I have got some paper scissors as well. I've got a pencil and a water erase pen because I'm going to be using an iron quite a lot, and hopefully you can see here I've bought out a bunch of buttons. These are in colours that I've used on my quilt, so I've got those handy as well. Then I've got my embroidery threads that are from my colour scheme that I've been using all the way through. These are all Anchor brand. And I've got my white, which is 001, my dark green, which is 683, my mid green, which is 258, my light green, which is 255, pink, which is 025, my red, which is 046, my yellow, which is 298, and my blue, which is 130. And I've got my ironing mat here as well, and I've got my little patchwork iron ready just out of shot so that I can do a bit of applique if I need to. This is the quilt that we put together last week, and I've just pegged it up somewhere so that I can see the whole thing all at once. And what I'm looking for are locations on the quilt where either I've got a mismatched corner, like over here, or some void, some spaces, and I'm picking out just some spots where I think we could do something, maybe something down here and maybe something over here, and then there's all the space along the bottom. There's a bit of a void here and maybe between these two blocks or along the bottom edge. Anywhere in the border really might be somewhere where I could put a little finishing touch. I have done this before, so my corners are mostly fairly precise. This one is ever so slightly misaligned, but there's a nice space there, and the easiest way of covering over it is to pop a button on. So I've got some red buttons here. I'm just looking for one that matches the kind of red that I've used on my quilt. I think this one is a bit too light. Most of these I've inherited from my grandma, so some of them are quite new, but most of them are quite vintage, I suppose, going back as early as the 1950s. So I think that one works okay. Maybe this one's better actually, it's a better shade of red. So I've got that one there, and I'm just clearing away the rest of those buttons. And it's a really simple process of stitching it on. So I've got some leftover blue thread here. I've got 2 strands, and I'm just going to put a quilter's knot in the end. And it's tricky because we're working with the whole quilt top, but what we want to do is slide our hand underneath and bring our needle through, and then we're going to just stitch that button on just as normal. Now obviously this isn't a usable button, so you don't have to put as many stitches in it as you would if it was going to be in use, unbuttoning and rebuttoning something. And you can also use some quite nifty stitching technique. So if you wanted to, you could put some decorative stitches that reach out beyond the button. So fly stitch works. You could start a fly stitch off the button and make the stalk of that fly stitch go through the buttonhole. You can use some blanket stitching. There's loads of different creative ways that you can sew a button on. You can also take your thread down from the front and leave a tail and then come up again and tie a knot, so you've got a little trailing thread on the surface. That always looks quite nice as well. I'm just going to put a straightforward stitch across, and that button sitting there will then cover up any dodgy joint. I've put another blue one here. This one's a 4-hole button, so that's a way of doing it that's really easy, really straightforward. So another method that you could use is to add a Suffolk puff, and we've made these before. We did our Suffolk puff roses, and we also did our Suffolk puff daffodils back in March, quite a long time ago, and these are really simple. I'm just going to draw around my jam jar lid because you need a circle that is twice as big as the Suffolk puff that you're going to make. So the diameter of this circle will be halved to form the diameter of the Suffolk puff. So I've just drawn around my lid there with my aqua pen, and I'm just cutting it out. You don't have to be too precise when you're cutting it out. You can just eyeball a circle if you want to by folding your fabric and just cutting an arc, but I don't know, it's the perfectionist in me. I always want to do a proper circle. So then I've got some just normal machine cotton, and I've knotted the end, and I'm just going through from the wrong side to the right side just to hide that knot, and then I want to fold over about 1/2 centimetre of the fabric and just running stitch along. So I'm turning over a little hem all the way around the circle, and you have to keep readjusting this to compensate for the curve, but just some little running stitches all the way around. And I find it quite tricky to start off. I feel like I'm all fingers and thumbs, but once you get going you can just thread the fabric onto the needle. So rather than making individual stitches, you can just rock the fabric like that to load it up onto the needle and then pull through several stitches together. So when you're back to the beginning, we're going to gently pull on this thread. I had to cut it there because there was a little noose knot caught that meant it wasn't gathering properly. But you just gently pull on the thread, and gradually the circle will gather up and form something like a mushroom top or a shower cap. And you just keep pulling until all of the space at the centre is taken up with the gathers. And then just ease out those gathers so that you've got a circular Suffolk puff, and you can get your needle in if you want to just pull that fabric out to the edge to make sure it's as thoroughly pulled as possible, and so that your Suffolk puff is sitting relatively flat. And then I'm just going to rethread my needle, and we're going to put a little quilter's knot at the centre. So I'm holding my needle down, wrapping my thread around it several times just to make it really secure, then pinching those wraps at the edge of the Suffolk puff, and then rather than cutting off my thread, I'm just going to feed it through so that it comes out on the fold at the edge of the Suffolk puff, because then I'm going to applique stitch it onto my quilt. So I found a location for it. There was nothing wrong with the join here, but I just thought it would be a nice place for a bit more red. And I'm going to use an applique stitch, so I'll go down through just the backing fabric and then bring my needle back up through both the backing fabric and the edge of the Suffolk puff. And I want my stitches about 1/4 centimetre apart, and I'm going to stitch all the way around the edge of that Suffolk puff to hold it in place. Just holding it down with my thumb and using my fingers on the back of the quilt to smooth out the quilt so that I don't gather up any fabric underneath it. So there's my Suffolk puff. You can see that the quilt's still lying really flat. So that's another way that you can embellish the joins between the corners of your quilt. Now we also, back in week 1, made our scrappy flowers, and we made a second block to match with that. And so what you can do is take motifs from elsewhere on the quilt and put them over your join. So I've just got some heat and seal here, and I've got a large circle. I'm just measuring up what would be a good neck size. So then I want a medium sized circle, and again looking at which circle fits best in that medium one, and then choosing a small circle. And I'm going to roughly cut these out of my heat and seal. And then we want to fuse this heat and seal onto the wrong side of our fabric. So I've got some red here. I think I thought that there wasn't quite enough red on the centre of the quilt, so I just wanted to add a little bit more in with these extra details. So a red button, a red Suffolk puff, and now I'm going to do some red concentric circles. So I've just fused that briefly with heat and seal. You only need to iron it for a couple of seconds for this first press, and then I want to cut out the circle precisely, cutting through the paper and the fabric. So you can see my usual trick where I rotate the thing I'm cutting rather than the scissors. So you just roll that round as you're cutting with the scissor blades. Then I peel off the backing, and I'm just going to press that in place. I've put it on the bottom edge. I actually moved it in the end. You can move it by just reheating the glue and lifting it off. You just slide your needle underneath and it will make the glue come away. Again, it doesn't actually leave a residue on your fabric. The glue seems to stay on the fabric that you're sticking. So just cutting out my middle circle and adding that over the top, and then I've got a small circle that I've put in yellow, and then I'll just embroider over that in the way that I've embroidered my others. Now I also thought you could make some little applique shapes, and we've done this loads. I've got a little mushroom here, so I've cut a stem shape out of some white fabric, and then I've just cut a little elongated semicircle out of some of my red spot, and you can just applique that on over a join. So I'm just going to take the white paper backing off of the stalk. You always want to put the thing that is underneath or behind down first. So I'm just popping my little mushroom stalk on, making sure that I've located it correctly. And I'm going to fuse that onto the backing with my iron. So I've chosen a few mushrooms. You could do anything. You could do some bees. You could take motifs from elsewhere in the quilt. So our flower garden flowers, you could put some of those on. You could fussy cut some motifs out of your patterned fabrics like we've done for other blocks. So again, you would just use Bonder web or heat and seal. You'd put a piece of heat and seal across the back of the fabric and then just cut out any motifs that you want to use. And we can't just have one mushroom, so I've got another one ready. This one's a lot squatter, so a fatter stalk here, probably too big, but we can adjust that. So if I pop this on and then put the mushroom cap on, they're all going to be sitting at the same level, and I'm not too keen on that idea, so I've just put the stalk on as a starting point. And then I've got a sort of flatter mushroom cap. I want them all to look slightly different, and if I put it just at the top, you can see the tops of those mushrooms sit level, and I don't really like that. So I'm going to move it down so that it's just over the edge of my border there. So they're at different heights, and have got a third one, so I've got a really scrawny stalk. Now this corner was significantly off. You can just about see there how far over that green ladybird block is coming onto that butterfly, so I wanted to cover over that. And I thought having a mushroom growing out of the corner might be quite nice. So I've got a really slender stalk there and a very flat mushroom cap, so you can adjust the shape of the mushroom cap depending on where the inaccuracy is in your join. I can then just embroider over the top of that. I've just done my appliquing. I can then add some embroidered detail, and I'll do that, and then I'll come back and show you what I've come up with. So just, yeah, look for the spaces, look for any locations where you think you need something extra and add them in. So here's my stitched mushrooms. I've put some blanket stitch around the edge and then just some running stitch around the stalk. You could add some embroidered embellishment over this if you want to. Here's my concentric circle. I've used my elongated detached chains. I've got a bit of a dodgy one there, but I won't tell anyone if you don't. And then I've got my Suffolk puffs, and again you can embroider in these. You could do some concentric circles around them in stitch like we did with our roses. And again, I've got some ladybird fabric here. They might look nice fussy cut and put along the border or anywhere else on the quilt. So I hope that gives you some ideas of how to tidy up your mismatched corners if you have any, and how to make your quilt totally your own. And I've deliberately not shown you loads and loads of ideas because this is a great opportunity for you to personalise your quilt, add some little motifs if there's something you were hoping we would use. You could just add it on at this point. I'll put some videos over here to help you come up with some ideas for things that you can add, and don't forget to hit our subscribe button so that you can see more of our content. Have a great week embellishing your quilt, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!